Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirma Magedhi Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Our subject this morning is the Shiva ideal. On this Wednesday, we'll have the annual Mahashivaratri Puja, which is the great night of Shiva. And so I thought it'll be good for us to reflect a little bit on not just the meaning of the worship itself, but also what Shiva represents. Because oftentimes when we participate in a puja, if we understand the inner significance of the puja that we are witnessing, we will derive a greater benefit from it. Now, Shiva is the name of a deity, and as with most deities, the word points to a spiritual ideal or quality. And the literal meaning of the word Shiva in Sanskrit means that which is auspicious, that which is good, that which is holy, that which is sacred. A deity in the Vedanta tradition is a symbol that takes us to the reality which is beyond. But the deity is not simply a symbol. It's a powerful symbol. And the power that comes in a deity comes from the reality which lies at the heart of that deity. So the divine reality which the deity represents and embodies, it is that reality that invests that representation of the divine with the power to shower grace, the power to transform our lives. So Shiva is one such very powerful deity in the Vedanta tradition. And there is the song that we do quite often in the Vedanta Center called the Nirvana Shatkam. And every verse of that song ends with this: Chidananda Rupa Shivoham Shivoham. My nature is pure consciousness and bliss. I am Shiva, I am Shiva. Shivoham, aham is I. Shivoham, I am Shiva. So what does this phrase mean? I am Shiva. Who is Shiva? And what does being Shiva imply? Now, it's not too difficult to understand what the general significance of that phrase is. I am Shiva means that my true nature is purity, its holiness, its auspiciousness. The truth that transcends form and formlessness seemingly acquires form and name to kind of make it more accessible to us. Because sometimes we may have discovered it in our own lives. Sometimes reading about philosophy and these abstractions can be very intellectually stimulating. And there is a kind of a feeling like, oh yeah, now I understand it. I get it. But then, as we go about our day-to-day activities, that abstraction doesn't seem to touch our daily lives. The mind, the heart, long for something more graspable, something more tangible. And that's the big challenge for many of us in spiritual life, how some of these concepts and ideas, how to make them more real in our lives. Because we know it's only that which is real that can nourish us, that can strengthen us. For instance, the idea of a nice, hearty, nourishing meal can be great. The idea is wonderful, but we can't live on that idea. We actually need to go and eat a real meal in order to be nourished. So simply the idea of Shiva, the idea of God, the idea of spirituality, it's wonderful. But if we have to be nourished by it, then we need something more real. And that is the purpose that is served by many of these visible symbols and the murtis, the images, the ideas, the mythology. What it does is it makes these abstractions, philosophical abstractions, more real, more tangible. If we separate them from the reality, then it would just seem pointless. But when you see that behind them and invested in these symbols is that reality, then these symbols acquire a great power and a great meaning. And we find that in many of the deities that are worshipped, in many traditions. You'll find the different pujas we have at the Vedanta Center, whether it's a Durga Puja, Kali Puja, all these different deities, they are the same one divine being appearing in many different forms. And we might say, the analogy that came to my mind was, think about the Statue of Liberty, for instance. It's so magnificent, so wonderful, and you take a long, short view of it. It looks beautiful. But then if you want to, I want to go close and see every little detail on that Statue of Liberty, then if you go close, then you might be able to see the specific details in every, the fingers, the eyes, everything. But the closer you go, you might lose the full picture because you're gone too close to it, but then you see some of the details in greater detail. And so that's essentially how it is. The immensity of the divine is such. There was a great Vedanta teacher called Sri Ramanuja, and he refers to the divine as Sakala Kalyana Guna Nilayaya. Nilaya is abode. So he says the divine is the repository or the embodiment of all the infinite auspicious qualities. Now that's a lot. And so from a distance, we kind of have the idea of the magnificence of the divine. But then we say, now let me just go a little bit closer and try to look at things in a little bit more granular way, more in a details. And that's when we then see some of these specific qualities that are parts of the divine or those which are manifested in the divine. And over time, over centuries, and it's not been done something arbitrarily. I'm sure these are the kind of experiences great mystics have had. So when they think about the power of the divine, the immense power of the divine, and the Shakti, they often saw, in that close look at that infinite divine, they saw the goddess, the Devi, the feminine aspect of the divine. And that's why then we worship the goddesses as forms of Shakti, the power, energy, and so on. So every deity represents those. You think about Hanuman, some aspect of the divine comes before it. Think of Krishna, think of Rama, and so on. So when we think of Shiva, that's what we'll try to do this morning. That what are the aspects of the divine that come into prominence when we try to look at that divine through this window called Shiva. And one of the things that might become apparent when you are familiar with these other deities in the Vedanta pantheon, we think about Vishnu, Krishna, and Rama, and Shiva looks, even in appearance, looks a little bit different. And we will see the iconographic description of Shiva, how it is different from others. But one of the best ways to understand the characteristics of Shiva is through a story that many of you may be familiar with, but it's good to be reminded of that story. as we prepare for the Shivaratri Puja. This story is called the churning of the milk ocean. So in Indian mythology, there is this idea that at some point this whole universe, creation, was filled with this mythical ocean. And it was believed that at the bottom of the ocean were these great treasures. And among the treasures was this one big jar, an Amrita Kalasha. Kalasha is a jar. Amrita means filled with this nectar of immortality. And while we might want a lot of things in life, what most people would love to have is if I can have something by which I will never die, I'll become immortal. That seems like a greatest prize. So there are these two forces. Always there are two forces, the forces of good, the forces of evil. In Indian mythology, they were represented by, they called the devas or suras, and the forces, the wicked forces were called asuras. And so both of them, they were very eager to get these treasures from under that ocean. And while there were many treasures, as I said, the most covetous treasure was that jar filled with nectar. And so the ocean was very deep, and neither of them had the capacity or ability to go down themselves and take it up. So they had to collaborate with each other. And sometimes we find in situations in life, even today, we find that sometimes we may totally disagree with someone, but there could be something which we share in common, that we want something together. And so we say, let us collaborate, even though we might have differences. That's more or less what happened. So the Devas and Asuras, knowing that neither of them could on their own get those treasures, that let's pool our resources together. And so we read in mythology, they took this highest mountain, it's called Mount Meru, as the churning rod. And then there's this big mythical snake called Vasuki, became the rope, which put around the churning rod. So the devas held it on one side, the asuras on the other side, and they started churning the ocean. And the idea was, once you start churning, that which is at the bottom will rise to the surface. And yeah, indeed, what they had believed was true. There were lots and lots of treasures. They started coming up. And the books mention many treasures which came up. And as soon as the treasures came up, one understanding they had before they began this project together was that once that jar of nectar, that Amrita, once it comes up, both the sides are going to share it equally among themselves. Collaboration. But if any other treasures come up, there were no rules. Whoever can grab it first, they can get it. And so lots and lots of things started coming up. And of course, it's first come, first served. Get it and get it. So, and then we won't go into all the details about what are all the others, but there are very interesting things came up. But everyone is waiting for that jar of nectar. But something else was there in that ocean they didn't know about. So before that jar of nectar came, something else started bubbling up. Kind of a very vicious kind of a liquid, very poisonous. Fumes were coming out of it. And everyone got terrified. Oh, we hadn't prepared for this. What is this? And then they quickly realized it was the most virulent poison. It was so powerful that it could have destroyed the entire creation. And of course, because all the treasures were coming up, everyone, all the citizens in that creation, everyone was present there because you could grab whatever things came up. But once that poison came, everyone got terrified. Nobody had any power to do anything about it. And so they said, if we have to survive, then we need to do something about this poison. Of course, there's only one person who had not gone for this big circus of churning of the ocean. And that was Shiva. Shiva is sitting there all alone on Mount Kailash, deep in meditation as usual. So then they quickly realized the only one person, if he had any power to do about this, that was Shiva. So they all rushed to Kailash and say, Shiva, save us, save us. Then Shiva opens his eyes. He sees this poison coming up. And he doesn't need to rush all the way there. From where he is, he just extends his arm and picks up that whole poison in the palm of his hand. And then just drinks it. And of course, the ocean is freed from that poison, and the people are again start churning again, because they are really waiting for that. But before we go to the main story, I can tell you a footnote to that story, since the big Kumbh Mela is much in the news nowadays. That's that big religious gathering that's been occurring in India. That's also connected with this story. So although that's not really what I wanted to talk this morning, but just as a footnote. So eventually, after the poison was removed by Shiva, and we'll come back to that again, these people start churning, and then this jar filled with nectar comes up. Now remember, they had planned, they were going to share it equally among themselves. These gods, these forces of good, are not necessarily very unselfish. I mean, they are quite crooked in their own way. And sometimes people who are more intelligent can do a lot more harm than people who are stupid. And so these gods, although they had agreed to that, their contract, they're going to share it equal, they had already made plan that once it comes up, we are going to squirrel it away, not give it to these asuras. And part of the reason is, if these forces of evil also become immortal, then we are just stuck with this problem. And so they didn't want to share it with them. And so the story is, I'm making it very brief. So Indra's son was a person named Jayanta. So he took the form of a crow. Now, don't ask me why. He did it. And so as that jar filled with nectar came up, this Jayanta, as crow, picks up that jar and leaves the place. These asuras are furious. It's like, wait a minute, what about our understanding? So they knew that nobody is going to follow the rules now. So these asuras start chasing that crow. Now that crow with that jar filled with nectar in his mouth, the crow is going around this whole creation, and all these people are chasing that crow. Now, after some time, of course, everyone got, how long can you just go on wandering through the creation? They both got tired. So the crow then, just to catch his breath, put the jar down in 4 spots. And then again picked it up again, and again the chase continued. And so when that jar was kept down with a kind of a thud, some drops from that nectar fell in those 4 places. Now each of those 4 places on a bank of a river. And somehow through these, the timings mentioned in mythology, they were able to calculate the exact the timing, the location, the date of when that occurred. And so the belief is now that those exact times when that jar was kept and these few drops of nectar fell into that river, if we can go to that place at that same time, then those drops, since they followed into the river, if we take a dip into that river at that time, then all our sins will be washed away and we'll become immortal. It's that belief that is now given rise to this for centuries old practice of pilgrimage, going to this places called Kumbh Mela. Kumbh is actually a jar. And so that's where people go in millions, actually. It's in the Guinness Book of World Records, I'm told, as the largest religious gathering of all time. And so that's what they do. It occurs once every 12 years. in these 4 places, in Haridwar, in the bank of Ganga, in Prayag, where it is being held now, where there is a confluence of Ganga and Jamuna and Saraswati, and then in Ujjain, on the bank of Narmada, and in Nasik, on the bank of Godavari. So that's just about Kumbh Mela. Okay, now keep it aside. Now remember Shiva who had taken that, we go back to that. Shiva who had drunk that poison. Now that poison, I said, had the capacity to destroy the entire creation. But Shiva was such a powerful person. He was willing to sacrifice himself to save the world. But he was a great yogi. So what he could do, he took the poison, and when it reached here, he said, stop. Shiva could do it. You just drink a little water and say stop, it won't. That's why he's Shiva. So that poison went and just stopped here. So while he is all powerful, but that poison itself was also so powerful that it changed his throat. It made it blue colored. And so one of the epithets attached to Shiva is the blue-throated, Neelakantha. So what does this story teach us? Several things. The first thing we see is that, well, everyone had gone for the churning of the ocean, waiting to see, wow, what treasures I can get, what can I get out of it. The only person who stayed away from this whole thing was Shiva. It just shows the kind of indifference to what everyone holds dear. Shiva looks deeply and says, it may not be something that look as great as it looks. And sometimes in life we realize that, especially as we get older, some of the things that were so meaningful and we just kind of rushed headlong into it, later on we realize it wasn't worth it. I could have done something else. I could have sought something else. And so Shiva recognizes her. So that is one of the first characteristics we see, that looking deeply into things and seeing that what appears shining, beautiful, attractive, may not be that if we look deeply. And so Shiva was the one who stayed away from that. As they sometimes say, all that glitters may not be gold. And Shiva nature, or Shiva ideal, is one to recognize that, not get fooled by everything that is just glittering. Secondly, we see the willingness to accept what is rejected by all. Everybody wanted the treasures, nobody wanted the poison. And Shiva said, okay, I'll have that. And we'll see how in the iconography of Shiva that gets represented as well. And finally, the readiness to sacrifice and be of service to others. Although Shiva had no personal interest in this whole endeavor, he was willing to say, okay, I'm going to help you, I'm going to save you. Now, when we now look at the way Shiva gets represented, whether in images or in pictures, we see, and that's what I was referring to earlier, why Shiva is so different from others. Most other deities we see, they have the kind of shining golden clothes and these ornaments. It's beautiful, it's charming. In Shiva, we see none of that. No gold jewelry, there is nothing there. And all that Shiva is wearing in many, the way Shiva gets represented, is actually usually a tiger skin. That's oftentimes how Shiva gets represented. Among the jewelry, the necklace, he just has a poisonous snake around him. And then all kinds of creatures. There are scorpions, and then among his companions are what, like, we think about these all people who are not accepted by generality. Those who are rejected, those who are looked down upon. And Shiva says, come, be my companion, be my attendants. And most of these deities have a vehicle in Indian mythology. And for instance, we see in Vishnu has a golden eagle, very majestic. Durga has a lion. These are amazing, amazing. And all of these things are very meaningful when you study those iconographic details. In Shiva, Shiva's vehicle is an old bull, not even a young bull. A young bull can be useful in many ways, but an old bull who just can't do anything. And Shiva says, nobody wants an old bull. Come, you be with me. Again, exactly as we saw the kind of characteristics in the story, that which nobody wanted, Shiva said, be with me. And there's a very ancient temple of Shiva in Kathmandu, in Nepal. And Shiva is called the Pashupati Nath. Pashu means an animal or any living being, the leader of every living creature, and especially of animals. In that temple, if you have been there, or if you would like to go there, or if you want to just read about it, it's amazing. That temple, all animals are allowed inside. And nobody stops them because Shiva is Pashupati there. In fact, I remember when I visited there more than 20 years ago, there with a group of devotees, and we were sitting in the courtyard of that temple, and then there is this one bull came straight towards us. And the bull wanted to sit in exactly the spot where we were sitting. There's nothing you can do. They get the preference for everything. We had to just pick up everything, and the bull goes and sits there. And we had to go and find some other place. So there are bulls and cows and donkeys and goats. They're everywhere. Somehow they seem to know that they have the priority in those places. It's amazing. That's the ideal that Shiva represents. I remember way back when I was very young, when I read this, there's an essay on Shiva that Sister Nivedita, Swami Vivekananda's Irish disciple, wrote about. And that was my first time I read about this, that Shiva doesn't reject anybody. And somehow it seems so wonderful that sometimes you feel, oh, am I fit enough? Will God accept me the way I am with all my imperfections and so on? And then the Shiva ideal says, here is one place we could go to. He'll never say no. Sometimes we also, of course, see in terms of what the idea that Holy Mother represents. How a mother will not say no to anyone. A Shiva is like a mother in that one. So all the stories that we find associated with Shiva in Indian mythology highlight one or the other of these characteristics. So, coming to Shiva Puja, Shivaratri Puja, what would make participating in that puja meaningful to us? Why should we participate in that puja? What would be the incentive for me to do it? What would be the necessary things for me in order to learn from that puja? One of the things that we might want to look for in our lives is that conviction that the characteristics that Shiva represents are characteristics worth striving for. That the qualities that Shiva have, are they meaningful to me? Is it something that I would like to strive for in my own life? The second thing required is faith, that pleased by my worship, Shiva will grant me the strength to acquire those virtues. And finally, that, we have this Shiva Puja, Shivaratri, once a year, that Shiva is actually a part of daily life, not just on the Shivaratri once a year. So many of these pujas we have kind of annual puja. It's not something that, just do that puja, feel a little good about it, and then you can forget about it until next year. That somehow can Shiva become a part of my daily life? Because these ideals of looking deeply, holding on to things that matter, of sacrifice, and so on, that's not a once in a year kind of a thing. That somehow should be so ingrained, so much be a part of my personality, that I should not only try to read about it, think about it, but somehow make an effort to live by these principles. So, one way to understand that is, can these characteristics of Shiva become my own? And very typically, the Vedantic approach is they are already my own. That's what Shivoham means. I am Shiva. Now, we might say, I don't feel that way right now. I understand the value of sacrifice, but I don't think I sacrifice at every opportunity that comes to me in my life. I understand the value of looking deeply and being indifferent to things which appear valuable but may not be so as valuable as they seem. But I might still find, well, I'm not able to live up to that ideal myself. And the way Vedanta students try to understand that is that while all of these qualities are already my own, there are certain obstructions here which are preventing the full manifestation of those ideals. And all I need to do is to remove those obstacles from my heart. And then this inherent love, the inherent sacrifice, the inherent ability, the qualities that Shiva have will automatically then manifest outwardly. The worship of Shiva, in a way we can say, is nothing but a worship of the externalizing of our Shiva nature. So what this means, or what would be when the Shiva characteristics become my own, not simply intellectually, but in my daily lived experience. That is beautifully described by a beautiful verse from a composition of Sri Shankaracharya. It's a verse that we often even chant during the puja. This is how it goes. Atma tvam girijamati sahachara prana shariram griham pujate vishayopabhoga rachana nidra samadhi sthitihi sancharav padayo pradakshina vidhi stotrani sarva giro yadyat karma karomi tattadakhilam shambho tavaradhanam. What it means is this. This is the translation. O Shiva, you are my true self. The Divine Mother is my mind. My senses are your attendants, and this my body is your home. All these sense contacts are parts of your worship. My sleep is like remaining in samadhi. Wherever I go, I'm just going around you. All the words that I speak are hymns to you, and all forms of activities I engage myself in, O Shiva, are your worship. It's such a beautiful verse. We speak about, there is a whole, people can talk endlessly about Karma Yoga, and we can write about it, we can read about it. But there is this one line, all forms of activities that I engage in are worship of Shiva. That's the essence of Karma Yoga. Everything can, if we strive to make it, be invested with spiritual significance. All the words that I speak are hymns to you. One of our Swamis, very elderly Swami, he was a disciple of Mahapurush Maharaj, his name was Swami Ranganathanandaji. He used to say that when he was very young and he had going to school, and maybe he was just 7, 8, 9 years old. And clearly, when you go to school, you're meeting with friends and you hear maybe acquire new words in your vocabulary. And so this young child came home and he had heard some of his friends there using some slang, abusive words. And so he learned a new word. So he came home and started showing his mother what new words he had learned. And his mother was horrified. And he said, all that his mother told him was, look, God is Saraswati. who is the goddess of knowledge. He said that Mother Saraswati dwells on your tongue. Remember that. So all the words that you speak, Mother Saraswati is a witness of that. And he said the way his mother told him that, never again in his life. Forget about using an abusive language. He couldn't even use a word that could hurt anyone, knowing that Mother Saraswati is present there. And that is what is the idea here. All the words that I speak are hymns to you. So everything, it's not, we don't have to be religious only when we are in a place of worship. In fact, I would think that true religion begins when you leave the place of worship, when we go out into the world, so to speak. How I live there, how I relate to the people there, how do I treat other people, how do I speak, what does my mind think when I'm not inside a church or a temple. That's what shows where my religion is. It is only on the lips, it's only a once in a week kind of a thing, or it's become a part of my life. So this beautiful verse encompasses all of those ideas. As our Shiva nature begins to manifest, we don't stop at seeing Shiva and thinking about these things only in a ritualistic context, or only in a temple, or only on special times during the year. We will begin to see, when it becomes a part of our life, we'll begin to love and serve all, especially those who are needy, the depressed, the defeated, the neglected of this world. Like Shiva, then, we'll become ready to accept what others reject, and sacrificing for others will come naturally to us. And when that happens, that is the mature form of Shiva worship. But to reach that state, we begin with this worship that we do in a temple. But that should make us strong enough. We should become a little bit of that Shiva nature should enter into us, so that in however small a way, that Shiva should manifest in the way we go about our day-to-day activities. These are Swami Vivekananda's words. He said, "This is the gist of all worship, to be pure and to do good to others. He who sees Shiva in the poor, in the weak, and in the diseased, really worships Shiva. And if a person sees Shiva only in the image, his worship is but preliminary. He who has served and helped one poor person, seeing Shiva in that person, without thinking of the person's caste or creed or race or anything, with him Shiva is more pleased than with the person who sees Shiva only in temples." This is very important. And Swami Vivekananda narrated a short story about this. I will read it out to you in his own words, and then I will stop. So these are Swami Vivekananda's words, the story that he narrated. He said, "A rich man had a garden and 2 gardeners. One of these gardeners was very lazy and did not work. But when the owner came to the garden, the lazy man would get up and fold his arms and say, 'How beautiful is the face of my master,' and dance before him. The other gardener would not talk much, but would work hard and produce all sorts of fruits and vegetables, which he would carry on his head to his master, who lived a long way off. Of these 2 gardeners, which would be the more beloved of the master? Shiva is that master, and this world is his garden. And there are 2 sorts of gardeners here. The one who is lazy, hypocritical, and does nothing, only talking about Shiva's beautiful eyes and nose and other features. And the other who is taking care of Shiva's children, all those that are poor and weak, all animals, and all his creation. Which of these would be the more beloved of Shiva? Certainly, he that serves Shiva's children. He who wants to serve the Father must serve the children first. He who wants to serve Shiva must serve Shiva's children. must serve all creatures in this world first. It is said in the scriptures that those who serve the servants of God are his greatest servants. And then Swamiji continues, saying, "Let me tell you again that you must be pure and help anyone who comes to you, as much as lies in your power. And this is good karma. By the power of this, the heart becomes pure, that is called Chitta Shuddhi, and then Shiva, who is residing in everyone, will become manifest. He is always in the heart of everyone. If there is dirt and dust on a mirror, we cannot see our image. So ignorance and wickedness are the dirt and dust that are on the mirror of our hearts. Selfishness is the chief sin, thinking of ourselves first. Those who think, I will eat first, I will have more money than others, I will possess everything. Those who think, I'll get to heaven before others, I'll get moksha before others, are selfish people. The unselfish person says, I will be last. I do not care to go to heaven. I will even go to hell if by doing so I can help my own brothers and sisters. This unselfishness is the test of religion. Those who have more of this unselfishness are more spiritual and nearer to Shiva. Whether they are learned or ignorant, they are nearer to Shiva than anybody else, whether they know it or not. And if a person is selfish, even though he or she has visited all the temples, seen all the places of pilgrimage, they are still further off from Shiva. Very powerful words. So as we get ready for Shiva worship on Wednesday, let's make an effort to keep in mind these ideals, look to see how far or how near we are to living by these principles. If we find that we need to make some changes or improvements in our life, the Shiva puja would be a good time to begin. Or actually, good time to begin is right now. Why wait even for 2 more days? But still, these are the kind of things we need to reflect on. And if we keep these things at the back of our mind and then attend the puja, we'll find a much greater benefit from that. A benefit that will last not simply for that day, but then throughout the year and also beyond that. Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu.